Have you ever wondered why some people crumble at the slightest criticism, while others remain unshaken even in the face of devastating setbacks? I've spent decades studying the world's most successful individuals, and I've discovered something remarkable. 97% of people live their entire lives as slaves to their emotional reactions, never realizing that the greatest power they possess lies dormant within them. My friends, what I'm about to share with you today could very well be the most important principle you'll ever learn. It's a truth so profound yet so simple that most people miss it entirely, and it's costing them everything they truly desire in life. Think about the last time someone criticized you, or when a project you worked on failed, or when someone you trusted let you down. How did you react? Did emotions flood your system? Anger, resentment, self-doubt, or fear? Of course they did. That's what happens to most people. But what if I told you that your emotional reactions are not who you truly are, they're merely the voice of your inner enemy? Today, I want to introduce you to a principle that has transformed the lives of countless individuals I've mentored over the years. I call it strategic non-reaction, the art of acting as if nothing affects you, not as a form of denial or suppression, but as a powerful tool to unmask the hidden adversary within your own mind. This isn't about becoming cold or unfeeling, quite the opposite. It's about accessing a level of personal power that most people never experience because they remain trapped in the prison of their instinctive reactions. Let me tell you about George, a brilliant businessman who came to me at the brink of bankruptcy. His company was failing not because of market conditions, but because his explosive temper and defensive reactions were driving away his best employees and clients. "Napoleon," he told me, "I know I'm smart enough to succeed, but something inside me keeps sabotaging everything I build." What George discovered through our work together changed everything for him. By learning to temporarily suspend his reactions to act as if nothing affected him, he began to see patterns emerging. A little voice in his head that would whisper, "They're trying to take advantage of you," or "They think you're incompetent," even when there was no evidence to support these beliefs. This voice, this inner enemy, had been running his life from the shadows. 6 months later, George's company was not only solvent but thriving. More importantly, George himself had transformed from a reactive, stressed leader into a man of genuine power and influence. What would your life look like if you could identify and neutralize the hidden saboteur in your mind? What could you achieve if you weren't constantly being hijacked by emotional reactions that drain your energy and distort your perception? The principle I'm sharing with you today isn't taught in schools. You won't find it in ordinary books on success. It's the kind of wisdom that's typically reserved for those rare individuals who have the fortune to be personally mentored by someone who understands the deeper mechanics of the human mind. The world's most successful men and women, from industrial titans to world leaders, have all mastered this principle, whether consciously or intuitively. When Andrew Carnegie first shared this concept with me as a young man, I couldn't fully grasp its significance. It was only after years of interviewing and studying hundreds of extraordinary achievers that I recognized this as perhaps the single most important factor separating the extremely successful from everyone else. Today, I'm going to walk you step by step through this transformative approach, showing you exactly how to implement it in your daily life to unleash your true potential. By the end of our time together, you'll understand precisely how to use strategic non-reaction to expose your inner enemy and reclaim control of your destiny. If you find value in what I share today, make sure to subscribe to this channel, where I regularly reveal the hidden principles of extraordinary achievement that I've gathered through my lifetime of research. Now, let's dive deeper into understanding why your reactions, not external circumstances, are the true determinants of your success. Let me ask you a question that might seem uncomfortable. How much of your life have you spent reacting rather than acting? Think about it carefully. Most people, if they're honest with themselves, will recognize that nearly 80% of their decisions, words, and actions are not the result of conscious choice, but automatic reactions to the world around them. This, my friends, is the invisible prison that keeps most men and women from achieving their true potential. We live in a reactive state rather than a creative one. When I began my research into the science of success nearly a century ago, I expected to discover that external factors, education, connections, opportunities, or even luck were the primary determinants of who succeeded and who failed. But time and again, my interviews with the world's most accomplished individuals revealed something far more fundamental: the capacity to maintain mental and emotional sovereignty, particularly under pressure. The average person is like a leaf blown about by every wind of circumstance. Someone speaks sharply to them, and they become angry or withdrawn. They face rejection, and they surrender their ambitions. They encounter obstacles, and they immediately begin spinning stories about why success is impossible for them. These reactions happen so quickly, so automatically, that most people never realize they have a choice. And here lies the great tragedy. These reactions are rarely aligned with our true interests or deepest desires. They are the voice of what I call your inner enemy, that part of your consciousness formed not through wisdom or choice, but through fear, past hurts, and limiting beliefs. Consider what happens when you receive criticism. Most people immediately experience a surge of defensive emotion, anger, shame, or anxiety. Their breathing changes, their muscles tense, and their thinking narrows. In this state, are they capable of receiving potentially valuable feedback? Of course not. Their inner enemy has hijacked their irrational faculties, and they react in ways that often damage their relationships and reputation. Or imagine an entrepreneur who faces a significant business setback. The inner enemy immediately begins its destructive work, generating thoughts like, "You've failed again. You never complete anything. Everyone will know you're a fraud." These thoughts trigger emotions of despair or panic, which then lead to poor decisions that compound the original problem. In my 50 years of studying human achievement, I've observed that this reactive pattern is the single greatest destroyer of human potential. And yet, most success literature barely touches on this fundamental issue, focusing instead on tactics and techniques that, while potentially useful, can never overcome the sabotage of an unrecognized inner enemy. I remember visiting Thomas Edison at his laboratory in West Orange after a devastating fire had destroyed years of his work and research. Most men would have been crushed by such a catastrophe. Yet Edison was calmly directing his employees, making plans to rebuild. When I asked him how he could remain so composed in the face of such loss, he said something I never forgot. "Napoleon, the greatest discovery I ever made was not the electric light or the phonograph, but the fact that my reactions belong to me, not to the world." What Edison understood, what all truly successful people understand, is that our reactions are not inevitable. They are habits, and like all habits, they can be changed. But first, they must be seen, and this is where most people falter. How can you change what you cannot even perceive? The conventional approaches to managing negative reactions all fail for the same reason. They attempt to address the symptom rather than the cause. Positive thinking, affirmations, even many meditation practices, these can provide temporary relief, but they rarely lead to fundamental transformation, because they don't allow you to clearly identify the source of these reactions. Your inner enemy is not your emotions themselves. Emotions are natural and valuable aspects of human experience. Your inner enemy is the unconscious programming that triggers inappropriate or excessive emotional reactions that work against your best interests. This enemy operates in the shadows. It thrives on your unawareness. The moment you try to suppress a negative reaction, you've already lost, because suppression only drives the pattern deeper. Similarly, trying to force positive thoughts over negative ones creates an exhausting inner conflict that drains your creative energy. Let me tell you about Margaret, an executive who came to me after being passed over for promotion 3 times. "I know I'm more qualified than those who were selected," she told me, "but something happens in the interviews. I become defensive. I talk too much, or I freeze completely." Margaret's problem wasn't her qualifications or even her interview technique. It was that her inner enemy, formed from childhood experiences of being criticized, was taking control precisely when she needed to be at her best. Every question felt like an attack, every moment of silence like judgment, and she reacted accordingly. The majority who fail in life are those who never recognize this pattern. They continue to believe that their success or happiness depends primarily on changing their circumstances rather than changing their relationship to their own reactive patterns. They spend years, sometimes decades, trying different external strategies while remaining prisoners of the same internal dynamics. But the small minority who achieve extraordinary success, those rare individuals who rise to the top of their fields and maintain their position, they have all discovered, whether through intuition or guidance, how to identify and neutralize their inner enemy. And the first step in this process, the key that unlocks everything else, is counterintuitive and profoundly simple. You must temporarily act as if nothing affects you. My friends, what I'm about to share with you is not merely another technique or strategy. It is a fundamental principle that, once mastered, will transform how you experience every aspect of your existence. The method I've developed through decades of research and practical application with thousands of individuals is what I call the strategic non-reaction protocol. This approach differs radically from conventional wisdom about managing emotions or developing mental toughness. Most teachings ask you to fight against your negative reactions or to replace them with positive ones, an approach that creates internal conflict and requires constant willpower. My method, by contrast, works with the natural laws of the mind rather than against them. The essence of this protocol is deceptively simple. When faced with a triggering situation, you temporarily act as if nothing affects you, not by suppressing your emotions or denying your experience, but by creating a deliberate pause space of observation between stimulus and response. In this space of non-reaction, something remarkable happens. Your inner enemy, accustomed to operating automatically and invisibly, is forced to reveal itself. The patterns of thought and emotion that have sabotaged your efforts toward success suddenly become visible, often for the first time. During my years consulting with Andrew Carnegie and later with countless other industrial titans and leaders, I observed how this capacity to maintain a stance of strategic non-reaction was often the deciding factor in their most crucial business negotiations and life decisions. It wasn't that these exceptional individuals didn't experience the same internal pressures as everyone else. They simply had discovered how to prevent these pressures from determining their actions. I recall Henry Ford telling me how, in the early days of his company, investors and even friends repeatedly told him his vision of affordable automobiles for the average American was foolish and impractical. "Had I reacted to their doubt," Ford said, "had I allowed their fear to become my fear, the Model T would never have existed." Instead, Ford developed the ability to listen without immediate reaction, to consider criticism without being dominated by it, and to maintain his vision despite external opposition. What separates this approach from mere stoicism or emotional suppression is its dynamic, investigative quality. You're not ignoring your reactions, you're creating the conditions to observe them with clarity. And through this observation, you gain the power to choose your response rather than being driven by unconscious programming. The promise I make to you is this: master the art of strategic non-reaction, and you will gain access to levels of personal power and clarity that most people never experience. You will see opportunities that were always present but hidden by your reactive patterns. You will make decisions from a place of genuine wisdom rather than conditioned fear. And perhaps most importantly, you will free yourself from the exhausting cycle of emotional highs and lows that keep most people perpetually distracted from their true purpose. This transformation doesn't require years of practice or special abilities. I've seen individuals begin to experience profound shifts within days of implementing these principles. The human mind, for all its complexity, responds remarkably quickly to this approach. Because you're not trying to force or manipulate your consciousness, you're simply removing the obstacles to your natural state of clarity. What makes this method uniquely powerful is that it doesn't add another layer to your already busy mind. Instead, it creates space in which your innate intelligence can emerge. Think of it as clearing clouds from the sky. You don't need to create the sun, you simply need to allow it to shine through. The businessman who masters strategic non-reaction no longer makes panic-driven decisions during market downturns. The parent who implements these principles no longer perpetuates generational patterns of reactive behavior with their children. The leader who understands this approach inspires through presence and clarity rather than dominance and force. You might wonder why, if this principle is so fundamental, it isn't more widely taught or understood. The answer is simple. It contradicts our cultural conditioning toward immediate gratification and quick fixes. We've been trained to believe that more action, more effort, and more striving are always the answer. The idea that power might come from strategic inaction cuts against everything we've been taught. Additionally, this approach requires a level of self-honesty that many find uncomfortable. When you cease reacting automatically, you begin to see aspects of yourself that have remained hidden: your fears, your limiting beliefs, your patterns of self-sabotage. Most people unconsciously prefer the comfort of their familiar reactions, even when those reactions cause suffering, over the temporary discomfort of facing these truths. But you, my friend, are not most people. The very fact that you've stayed with me this far suggests you sense the truth in what I'm sharing. You understand, perhaps intuitively, that there's a deeper level of functioning available to you, a way of being that transcends the reactive patterns keeping so many trapped in cycles of frustration and unfulfillment. Now, let us explore the fundamental principles of this approach, so you can begin implementing it in your life immediately. The pathway to mastering strategic non-reaction consists of several key principles that, when applied together, create a profound transformation in how you navigate life's challenges. These principles aren't merely theoretical concepts, they are practical tools that you can begin implementing today. Begin with the practice of intentional pause. When faced with any situation that triggers an emotional reaction, whether it's criticism, disappointment, or even unexpected success, train yourself to create a momentary space between the stimulus and your response. This pause isn't about counting to 10 or taking deep breaths, although those might be helpful. It's about adopting a stance of deliberate observation. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a rushing river. The river represents your thoughts and emotions flowing in response to a trigger. Most people immediately jump into this river, becoming swept away in its current. The practice of intentional pause means standing on the riverbank instead, watching the water flow by without immediately entering it. This concept is beautifully illustrated by the story of Abraham Lincoln, who was known for writing what he called hot letters whenever he felt angry or upset with someone. He would pour all his raw emotion into these letters, expressing exactly what he felt in the moment. Then, Instead of sending them, he would put them in a drawer. Later, with a clear mind, he would decide what action would truly serve his greater purpose. Through this practice, Lincoln developed a reputation for exceptional emotional self-mastery that helped him lead during America's most divided time. The second principle is neutral observation. Once you've created the intentional pause, direct your attention to what's happening within your mind and body without judgment or interference. Notice the thoughts that arise, the emotions that surface, and the physical sensations that accompany them. This act of neutral witnessing is like shining a light into a previously dark room suddenly. Patterns that have operated invisibly come into clear view. Think of yourself as a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon rather than someone caught in the grip of a reaction. How fascinating, you might think, that this comment triggered such a strong feeling of inadequacy in me. Or interesting how my mind immediately generated a story about betrayal when this situation occurred. I worked with a talented physician who constantly sabotaged his career advancement because of his hair-trigger defensiveness in staff meetings. Through the practice of neutral observation, he began to notice that his defensive reactions always followed a specific thought. They think I'm not good enough. This thought had been operating below his awareness for years, triggering reactions that damaged his professional relationships. Once he could observe this pattern without being captured by it, its power over him began to diminish. The third principle is pattern recognition. As you consistently practice intentional pause and neutral observation, you'll start to identify specific patterns in your reactive responses. You might notice that certain types of comments always trigger anger, or that specific situations reliably produce anxiety or withdrawal. These patterns aren't random, they're the visible manifestations of your inner enemy's programming. Consider these patterns as trails leading back to their source. Each reactive pattern was originally formed as a protection or adaptation to some past experience. Perhaps criticism triggers defensive anger because, as a child, criticism was followed by rejection. Or maybe authority figures trigger anxiety because your early experiences taught you that authority was unpredictable or dangerous. In my consultations with Dale Carnegie, we discussed how his early experiences of poverty had created a pattern of overworking and inability to enjoy his success. I realized, he told me, that even when I had achieved financial security many times over, I was still reacting as if bankruptcy was imminent. By recognizing this pattern, Carnegie was able to make conscious choices about his work habits rather than being driven by unconscious fear. Pattern recognition isn't about psychoanalyzing yourself or dwelling on the past. It's simply about understanding the programming that drives your reactions so you can respond from choice rather than conditioning. The fourth principle is what I call the separation of identity. Most people make the fundamental error of identifying with their reactive patterns. They say, I am angry or I am anxious, as if these temporary states represent their true identity. Strategic non-reaction requires breaking this identification, recognizing that you are not your reactions, but the awareness that can observe these reactions. Imagine a vast, clear sky. Clouds may pass through this sky, sometimes dark and stormy, sometimes light and wispy, but the sky itself remains unchanged. Your fundamental awareness is like this sky, while your thoughts and emotional reactions are merely passing weather. When you cease identifying with the weather and recognize yourself as the sky, you experience a profound shift in perspective. Thomas Edison demonstrated this principle magnificently. When told that his 10,000 attempts at creating a viable electric light bulb represented failure, he famously replied, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Edison refused to identify with the concept of failure, choosing instead to see himself as the ongoing awareness engaged in discovery. The fifth principle is strategic redirection. Once you've created space through non-reaction, observed your patterns neutrally, and recognized them as separate from your identity, you gain the power to consciously redirect your energy. This isn't about suppressing or denying what you've observed, but about choosing a response aligned with your true objectives rather than your conditioned reactions. Think of it as the difference between a river flooding destructively across a landscape versus the same water being channeled through a hydroelectric dam to generate power. The emotional energy behind your reactions isn't inherently problematic, it's simply energy. Strategic redirection is about harnessing this energy constructively. When Andrew Carnegie faced union strikes that threatened his business, his initial reaction was anger and resentment. But through practicing non-reaction, he recognized this as a pattern stemming from his fear of returning to the poverty of his youth. Instead of acting from this reaction, he redirected his energy toward finding innovative solutions that ultimately benefited both his business and his workers. The sixth principle is consistent practice. Like any profound skill, strategic non-reaction must be developed through deliberate practice. Begin with smaller triggers in low-stakes situations. Notice the slight irritation when someone cuts in line at the store. Observe the flash of impatience when traffic slows your commute. These everyday moments provide perfect opportunities to strengthen your non-reactive muscle before facing life's greater challenges. Remember, my friends, the goal isn't to become emotionless or detached from life, quite the opposite. The goal is to engage with life from a place of choice and clarity rather than compulsive reaction. As you master this practice, you'll find yourself experiencing emotions more fully but being controlled by them less completely. I am reminded of Helen Keller, who told me once about her journey to emotional mastery despite facing challenges most of us cannot imagine. People assume, she said, that because I cannot see or hear, I must be disconnected from emotion. But I feel everything deeply, perhaps, more deeply than most. The difference is that I've learned not to let these feelings make my decisions for me. What makes strategic non-reaction so powerful is that it operates at the level of cause rather than effect. Most approaches to emotional mastery try to manage the effects, the already triggered reactions. This approach addresses the causal relationship to the triggering itself. Let me share a vivid analogy to help you understand how this works in practice. Imagine you're driving a car on a winding mountain road. Without the practice of non-reaction, it's as if you're driving with extremely sensitive steering that overreacts to every curve. The slightest turn of the wheel sends you veering toward the edge. This is how most people navigate life, overreacting to each stimulus, constantly overcorrecting, exhausting themselves in the process. Strategic non-reaction adjusts the sensitivity of your steering. The curves in the road are still there, life's challenges don't disappear, but you navigate them with measured, appropriate responses rather than jarring overcorrections. The journey becomes smoother, more controlled, and ultimately more enjoyable. I've seen this transformation in countless individuals across all walks of life. The business executive who no longer makes panic-driven decisions during market downturns, the parent who breaks generational cycles of reactive parenting, the artist who pushes through creative blocks that once would have triggered abandonment of projects. What has struck me most profoundly in your comments so far is how many of you are beginning to recognize the patterns that have kept you from achieving what you're truly capable of. I'd like you to take a moment now to reflect on which aspect of strategic non-reaction speaks most directly to your situation. What pattern has your inner enemy been using to limit your progress? Share your insights in the comments below. Your reflection may provide exactly the perspective someone else needs to recognize their own patterns. As you begin implementing these principles, Remember that the practice itself reveals the path forward. You cannot think your way to mastery of non-reaction. You must experience it directly, incrementally building your capacity through real-world application. A student once asked me, "How will I know if I'm making progress with this practice?" I told him, "You'll notice the space between stimulus and response growing larger, where once you reacted instantly, you'll find a moment of choice. And in that moment lies all the difference between living by default and living by design." The journey toward mastering strategic non-reaction isn't always comfortable. As you begin to catch yourself before reacting automatically, you'll come face to face with uncomfortable truths about your patterns. You might discover that beneath your anger lies fear, or that behind your procrastination lies a belief that you're not worthy of success. These revelations aren't pleasant, but they are precious. Each one represents a piece of your inner enemy's programming brought into the light, where it can no longer operate invisibly. Each recognized pattern is another step toward genuine freedom, the freedom to choose your response rather than being driven by unconscious conditioning. In my conversations with the most accomplished individuals of the past century, I found that this freedom, the ability to act from choice rather than reaction, was what they valued most in their achievement. Their material success was secondary to the internal mastery that made that success possible and sustainable. As we continue our exploration of this transformative approach, I encourage you to begin applying these principles immediately. Start small, notice one reactive pattern today. Create intentional pause in one challenging situation. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and your journey to mastering your inner enemy begins with a single moment of non-reaction. Now, my friends, I can already hear some of you thinking, "But Mr. Hill, isn't this approach asking me to become passive or emotionless? Life requires passion and immediate action." This concern is natural, as we've been conditioned to believe that quick reactions demonstrate strength and conviction. However, strategic non-reaction is the opposite of passivity, is the foundation of true power. Consider the master martial artist. Does she appear passive when facing an opponent? From the outside, perhaps. But that stillness conceals intense awareness and the ability to respond with precision rather than react with panic. She doesn't waste energy on premature movement or emotional displays. When she finally moves, her action is decisive precisely because it wasn't a reaction. You may also wonder, what about situations that genuinely require immediate responses? Surely I can't pause and observe when facing genuine emergencies. This is an excellent question that reflects practical wisdom. Indeed, some circumstances, a child running into traffic, a physical threat, a time-sensitive business opportunity may require immediate action. But here's what you'll discover as you practice strategic non-reaction. Your intuitive responses become increasingly aligned with your true objectives. The space you create through regular practice becomes available even in split-second decisions. The firefighter who enters a burning building isn't stopping to analyze their feelings. They're acting from trained intuition that functions cleanly because it's not clouded by unnecessary emotional reactions. Another objection I often hear is, "Won't people take advantage of me if I don't react?" This concern stems from the common misconception that displaying emotional reactions, especially anger or indignation, is necessary to establish boundaries or command respect. But ask yourself, who appears more powerful, the person who can be easily provoked into emotional reaction, or the one who maintains composure regardless of provocation? When Theodore Roosevelt said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," he wasn't advocating for emotional outbursts, but for the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can choose your response. True respect isn't gained through reactive displays, but through consistent, principled action that stems from inner clarity. Some of you may be thinking, I've tried to control my reactions before, and it never works. I always end up exploding later. This pattern occurs because most approaches to emotional management rely on suppression rather than conscious non-reaction. Suppression creates internal pressure that inevitably seeks release. Strategic non-reaction, by contrast, allows you to fully acknowledge what you're experiencing while choosing not to be driven by it. Have you ever found yourself replaying an argument in your mind, thinking of all the things you should have said, or dwelling on a perceived slight for days afterward? This mental rumination is the cost of reaction. When you react automatically, the situation controls you long after it's over. When you practice non-reaction, you retain your autonomy both during and after challenging events. Perhaps you're wondering, but aren't emotions important? Shouldn't I trust my feelings? Absolutely. Your emotions contain valuable information and energy. Strategic non-reaction isn't about ignoring your emotions. It's about creating space to understand them more clearly before acting. It's the difference between being informed by your emotions and being controlled by them. Remember, your emotional reactions were programmed based on past experiences that may have little relevance to your present circumstances. The anxiety that served you well when you were a child facing uncertain circumstances may be completely counterproductive as an adult making business decisions. Non-reaction allows you to update this programming rather than remaining bound by it. You might ask, if I'm not defined by my reactions, then who am I? This profound question leads to the heart of the matter. Most people derive their sense of identity from their habitual thoughts, emotions, and reactions. When these are revealed as merely conditioned patterns, it can create a temporary sense of disorientation. But on the other side of this disorientation lies an expanded sense of self, one that includes but isn't limited to your thoughts and feelings. When Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "What lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us," he was pointing to this deeper identity, the awareness that can observe and choose rather than merely react based on programming. Have you considered that your reactive patterns might actually be protecting something valuable within you? Perhaps your quick anger shields vulnerability you haven't yet learned to express constructively? Maybe your anxiety prevents you from taking risks that feel threatening to your sense of security. Strategic non-reaction allows you to honor these protective functions while developing more effective ways to meet your underlying needs. The greatest objection of all is often unspoken. The fear that if you cease identifying with your reactive patterns, you might discover aspects of yourself you're not prepared to face. This fear is natural but need not deter you. The journey of self-discovery through non-reaction reveals not only your limitations but also your extraordinary potential. Potential that has remained untapped precisely because your inner enemy has kept you confined to familiar reactive patterns. My friends, we've explored the individual principles of strategic non-reaction, but the true power of this approach emerges when you integrate these elements into a coherent system. Think of what we've discussed as individual instruments that, when played together, create a symphony of transformation far greater than the sum of its parts. Let me offer you a unifying metaphor to help you understand how these principles work together. Imagine your mind as a magnificent estate. Within this estate is a control room where decisions are made and actions are initiated. In most people's estates, this control room has been infiltrated by an imposter, the inner enemy, who has been making decisions while disguised as the rightful owner. This imposter doesn't announce itself. It operates by creating the illusion that its reactive decisions are your decisions. Its limiting beliefs are your beliefs. Its fears are your fears. Strategic non-reaction is the process of reclaiming your control room step by step, exposing the imposter, and reinstating yourself as the conscious director of your own life. The intentional pause is the moment you notice unusual activity in the control room. Wait, you think, something doesn't feel right about this decision being made in my name. Neutral observation is your investigation into what's actually happening, watching the imposter's methods without interference. Pattern recognition is connecting the dots between similar infiltrations in the past. Separation of identity is the profound realization, that's not me making those decisions, that's the programming of my inner enemy. And strategic redirection is taking back the controls and charting a new course aligned with your true objectives. When integrated properly, these elements create an upward spiral of increasing awareness and freedom. Each time you successfully practice non-reaction in a triggering situation, you strengthen your capacity to do so in the future. Each pattern you recognize becomes easier to spot in its earlier stages before it gains momentum. Each moment of conscious choice reinforces your true identity as the chooser rather than the reactor. Now, let me offer you a simple but powerful framework for implementing this integrated approach in your daily life. I call it the pause method. Perceive the trigger and create space before responding. Attend to your internal experience with neutral curiosity. Understand the pattern and its source without judgment. Separate your essential self from the reactive pattern. Engage consciously from choice rather than conditioning. This framework can be applied to any situation, from minor irritations to major life challenges. With practice, what initially might take several minutes of conscious effort will become second nature, available to you even in fast-moving circumstances. Consider how this integrated approach might transform different areas of your life. In your professional endeavors, imagine making decisions based on clear assessment of opportunities rather than fear of failure or need for approval. In your relationships, envision responding to conflicts from understanding rather than defensive reaction. In your personal development, think about pursuing goals driven by authentic aspiration rather than compensating for insecurity. A remarkable industrialist once told me how this integrated approach saved his company during the Great Depression. When the crisis hit, his colleagues panicked, making reactive decisions that further damaged their businesses. Everyone was operating from their inner enemy, he explained. Fear was making their decisions. By practicing strategic non-reaction, he was able to see opportunities where others saw only disaster, acquiring struggling assets at fraction of their value and positioning his company for unprecedented growth when the economy recovered. What made the difference wasn't that he didn't feel fear, he felt it as intensely as anyone. The difference was that he didn't allow that fear to make his decisions. Through practicing non-reaction, he maintained access to his full intelligence and creativity even under extreme pressure. The integration of these principles creates a fundamental shift in how you experience challenges. Problems that once appeared as threats to be feared become opportunities for practice and growth. Each trigger becomes a chance to strengthen your non-reactive capacity. The person who irritates you becomes not an adversary but a teacher, highlighting patterns that need your attention. This shift in perspective is beautifully captured in an ancient Eastern metaphor, the lotus flower that grows from mud. Without the mud, there would be no magnificent blossom. Similarly, without triggers and challenges, there would be no opportunity to develop mastery over your inner enemy. Every difficult circumstance contains within it the seeds of greater awareness and freedom approached through the lens of strategic non-reaction. The integration of these principles also creates a powerful synergy between your conscious and unconscious mind. Most people experience their unconscious as a mysterious force that sometimes helps and sometimes sabotages them. Through consistent practice of strategic non-reaction, you establish a new relationship with your deeper mind, one of partnership rather than conflict. I've observed that individuals who master this integrated approach develop an almost uncanny ability to attract favorable circumstances. This isn't mystical thinking but practical psychology. When you're no longer driven by reactive patterns, you notice opportunities others miss. You build relationships based on genuine connection rather than manipulation or neediness. You persist through challenges that defeat those caught in reactive cycles of frustration and resignation. As you implement this integrated approach in your life, remember that perfection isn't the goal. You'll still experience reactive moments. That's part of being human. The difference is that these reactions no longer define or control you. Each reactive episode becomes shorter in duration and less intense in its grip. The space between trigger and response gradually expands, creating room for your authentic wisdom to emerge. This is the journey from living at the mercy of your inner enemy to living from the authority of your true self. It's a journey well worth taking. My friends, perhaps the most important journey of your life. My friends, we stand at a pivotal moment. The knowledge I've shared with you today about strategic non-reaction and exposing your inner enemy has the power to transform your life, but only if you take action. Information without implementation leads nowhere. It's the difference between owning a map and actually making the journey. Right now, as you listen to these words, two paths lie before you. The first is the path of continued reaction, allowing your inner enemy to remain in control, making your decisions from the shadows, keeping you trapped in patterns that have limited your success and happiness for years, perhaps decades. This is the path of least resistance in the short term, but greatest regret in the long term. The second path requires courage, the courage to pause in moments when every instinct screams for immediate reaction, the courage to look honestly at patterns you've avoided seeing, the courage to choose differently even when it feels uncomfortable. This is the path that every truly successful person throughout history has walked. Which will you choose? The most dangerous decision you can make right now is to agree with everything I've said while telling yourself you'll implement it someday when things are less busy, when circumstances are more favorable, when you feel more ready. That day never arrives. Your inner enemy thrives on postponement, knowing that tomorrow's commitment rarely survives tonight's sleep. I challenge you to begin today, not tomorrow, not next week, but in the very next triggering situation you encounter. It might be as simple as someone cutting you off in traffic, a colleague making a comment that pushes your buttons, or an unexpected obstacle in your plans. Whatever it is, treat it as a precious opportunity to practice what you've learned. Create that intentional pause. Notice the automatic thoughts and emotions arising. Recognize the pattern from previous similar situations. Remember that you are not these reactions, but the awareness observing them. And then, from that space of conscious choice, decide how you want to respond. This first implementation doesn't need to be perfect. Like any new skill, strategic non-reaction develops through practice. The important thing is to begin to take that first crucial step that separates the doers from the mere knowers. Remember the story I shared about Thomas Edison? After thousands of unsuccessful attempts to create a working light bulb, he was asked if he felt like a failure. No, he replied, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Each of your reactive moments is an opportunity to discover what doesn't work, bringing you one step closer to mastery. The responsibility for this transformation rests entirely in your hands. No one can create the intentional pause for you. No one can observe your patterns for you. No one can separate your identity from your reactions for you. These are acts of personal power that you alone can perform. Some of you may be thinking, this sounds difficult. I'm not sure I can do it. But you've already demonstrated the capacity for non-reaction at various moments in your life. Think of a time when you remained calm despite provocation, when you chose a thoughtful response over an automatic reaction. That capacity isn't foreign to you, it's already within you, waiting to be developed through consistent practice. What are the costs of inaction? What price will you continue to pay if you allow your inner enemy to operate unchallenged? Consider the opportunities missed, the relationships damaged, the potential unfulfilled. Consider the exhausting cycle of emotional highs and lows that consume your energy and distract you from your true purpose. Now imagine a different future, one where you've mastered strategic non-reaction, where you move through life's challenges with clarity and purpose rather than reactive chaos. Imagine making decisions based on clear vision rather than conditioned fear. Imagine building relationships from authentic connection rather than unconscious patterns. Imagine pursuing goals driven by genuine aspiration rather than the need to prove your worth. This future isn't a fantasy. I've seen countless individuals achieve this transformation through the principles I've shared today. Some were business leaders who revolutionized their industries. Others were ordinary men and women who created extraordinary lives through this fundamental shift in how they navigated challenges. The choice between these futures, between continued reaction and conscious response, is yours to make. Not once, but moment by moment, trigger by trigger, day by day. Don't wait for perfect circumstances to begin. Don't wait until you fully understand every nuance of this approach. Understanding deepens through practice, not merely through intellectual comprehension. The learning is in the doing. Start with awareness. In the next 24 hours, simply notice how often you react automatically versus respond consciously. Don't judge what you observe, just gather data about your current patterns. This awareness alone will begin to create space between trigger and response. Then commit to practicing the pause method with at least one triggering situation each day. Record your experiences in a journal, noting what you observe about your patterns and your progress in creating space for conscious choice. Find an accountability partner, someone who shares your commitment to personal development, and discuss your experiences implementing these principles. The verbalization of your insights will deepen your understanding, and the commitment to another person will strengthen your resolve. The truly successful individual is not the one who experiences no challenges or triggers, but the one who has developed mastery in their response to these inevitable aspects of life. This mastery is available to you not as some distant achievement, but as a capacity you can begin developing today. Do not delay. Every moment of reaction strengthens your inner enemy's control. Every moment of conscious non-reaction weakens its grip and builds your true power. I want to hear about your journey. Subscribe to this channel and share in the comments below one specific pattern you've recognized through today's discussion, one way your inner enemy has been operating in your life. Your insight may provide exactly the perspective someone else needs to recognize their own patterns. Remember, what you do in this moment determines who you become in the future. Choose wisely, act boldly, and watch as your inner enemy loses its power while your true potential emerges in all its magnificent possibility.